It's not often a brand new ground-up car company launches. The cost and scale involved in the modern era means that it's rarely possible. But British manufacturer Ineos Automotive isn't letting that stop it trying. Its first car isn't all electric, it's not faddy, and it has a real-world focus, and that's borne out by our first look at its interior. Now, I'm sure you'll all be familiar with this thing and its styling because we saw it last year. Of course, it is the Ineos Grenadier. Now, we're here today to take a look at the inside more than the outside, but I thought it was going to be worth a recap of just how imposing this car is. I mean, look at it. We've got optional off-road tyres here, but they give the car a brilliantly utilitarian look. And of course, the Grenadier, that's what it's for. It's there to fill the space that the previous Land Rover Defender vacated. And just look at it, it's a tall-sided thing. You've got a utility belt here to kind of get accessories which you can hook onto, so think dining tables and other things like that. Big, rugged side steps. At the back, you've got this nice big glass window. There's not going to be a 7-seat version just yet, so the car will be 5-seat only, but more versions will come in time. So of course, we've heard about a double cab pickup. Now, go round to the back, and you'll see again, we've got a massive, rugged off-road spare wheel, a ladder. This will be optional, but it just gives the car a great look. And this split tailgate. Now, having a boot door that size, completely wide, hinged at the side or open at the top, splitting it just adds a little bit more practicality, and there's plenty of load space inside too, because this car's really been focused on that. It's that utilitarian element. There will be a lifestyle side to this car, and there'll be lots of normal consumers that will use it, but I think farmers, utility companies, people will really put the Grenadier to work, and this is going to help it. But of course, it's the interior we're here to see today. Now, we've not really seen any details about what the Grenadier is going to be like inside, but knowing the utilitarian theme and just how rugged the exterior styling is, we're really pleased to reveal that the theme inside is just the same. And we've got a man here who can tell us a little bit more about it. So I'm here with Toby Equier, Head of Design for Ineos Automotive. So Toby, talk us around the cabin of the Grenadier a little bit then.
Right. Oh, hello. I think probably easy to start off with where our thinking started, which was we looked at lots of other vehicles that were expected to perform well in all sorts of different extreme conditions, and the thing that really stood out to us was there's a great sort of logic behind the way they were laid out. It was very easy to understand, and there was a rationale behind the positioning of the various switches. So in its sort of basic terms, we ended up with a sort of central display because we felt that it was important that the other people in the car also had an involvement in the driving of that. So, for example, you could put all the information in sat-nav or choose music or call out waypoints, whatever, if I was concentrating on the driving. But then away from all of the sort of comfort buttons here, all the window heating, parking assist, and all those sort of useful bits and kit that we have, we've got all the off-roading gear controlled from the overhead panel, and all the auxiliary switches. So if we've got extra lights, with winch, it's all operated from that. So there's never that moment where you're trying to search through. Where's the fog light button exactly? We've kind of grouped all the switches together. You can see we've kind of written what all of the buttons do, so we're not trying to work out what the various symbols mean. I think we've all been there with the fog lamp question of which fog lamps
Front or rear,
are they actually turning on, so you just turn them all on. But so we've just tried to keep it as sort of logical and as straightforward as we possibly can. But also, we kind of felt that a lot of really, truly utilitarian vehicles were a bit kind of unnecessarily basic, and it felt a bit kind of archaic to keep thinking that sort of way, that actually why shouldn't you be comfortable and warm and dry and have some of the comforts that you would find in even a really basic car. They weren't making it through to a utilitarian vehicle. So it doesn't have to be rubbish, was our sort of thinking. So so we've tried to create an interior that's a little bit more kind of mature, a bit more interesting. to be in without it being a sort of super fashionable.
Definitely, I think in its own way, because of the simplicity and that really nice rugged feel, you've got these big buttons that you can operate with gloves on, guards for switches. That is fashionable in its own way, and it gives the Grenadier its character.
I think so, and I think that whole thing of operating with gloves on and wet hands. We've got a touch screen which is kind of is of the moment, and it's the kind of best way, I think, of actually putting all this information together in the simplest way. But it doesn't really work if you've got big wet gloves on, so you can then operate that from a rotary switch as well. So we've sort of tried to think through the actual operation of it rather than just have one idea and roll with it. We've been as pragmatic as we can about it, and honest with ourselves as well. But, I was for a long time really wanted to have analog dials. I thought that would be kind of in keeping and right. And then actually, there's a moment where you think all of that information that comes to those analog dials is coming through a microprocessor anyway. So why wouldn't you just embrace that and do away with it? Because it's then becomes a bit false, and that's not what this is about at all. And so that honesty that we had to have as a design team, I think, kind of comes through in the rest of the vehicle as well.
On the subject of analog dials then, there is one in the car.
Yeah.
So talk us through that. We've got this compass here. Am I right in thinking that can double as an analog clock as well?
Yeah, it can. Because I think, no matter how, the clock is about the only dial that you can actually operate without having to run through a computer. And there is something quite kind of familiar and comfortable with a proper clock. But equally, I think having that as a compass as well, that fits in with the sort of feeling of the car, and this sort of repeat circle that you kind of keep getting through, which the same sort of body shape that you get around the lights at the rear of the vehicle. There's a sort of little bridge with the outside, and I think that is the sort of centre point. And I think it's just a kind of an interesting moment.
Definitely,
in the vehicle.
It certainly is, and we've obviously talked about the kind of rugged nature, the switch gear, the simplicity of it, but of course a lot of Ineos's customers, they're going to be lifestyle buyers as well. So just finally, talk us around the cabin in terms of what people might be able to customise. We've got a nice finish on the steering wheel here.
Well, again, it's probably a little bit unusual, but one of the things that we noticed, certainly as we looked around all these other vehicles, where there were all these little kind of customisations that the everyday users were actually implementing themselves. And so, for example, on the sort of sailboats, as often they have a leather wrap around the wheel to always have grip when it's wet, and these sort of little moments that you think, well, actually, there's room for that, and it doesn't all have to be straight out of a really kind of sanitised sort of catalogue of interior parts. And so we've used proper tan saddle leather on the wheel, where that will wear with time. It will get dark in the bits that you hold all the time, and it will kind of dry out in bits in the sun, and you can kind of work into that. So you kind of build a sort of patina around that that's very much part of you. It's not you don't have to have it, but I think it's nice that it's available. So that's just to sort of bring in a little bit of the sort of humility, I think, along with things like the sort of port and starboard markers that, again, probably it's slightly light-hearted, but just in terms of when you're reversing with a trailer and someone's going, left a bit, is it their left or your left, or so if you're saying port and starboard, it works pretty well on boats for the last 200 years. I think there's room for that sort of thought through there. And then obviously the toot button, which is when you're just wanting to say hi to somebody, or driving up behind a cyclist, instead of, as we all try and do, a quick kind of bip on the normal horn, which ends up scaring the living daylights out of people, we've got this sort of toot button, which is just a kind of a hi. In terms of customising it, obviously we've got all the sort of pre-wired switches all here already, so you don't have to sort of start taking headlinings down and rewiring it yourself. We've tried to sort of anticipate what a number of extras that you might want, like a winch and overhead sort of camping lights, or driving lamps, all of this then is wired back to here, so we can then optimise these switches. And then if you find even more things you need to do, these panels are all removable, so you can then buy extra banks of switches to go in there.
Ineos is learning to walk before it can run, and we mean that wholly as a positive rather than criticism. It's focusing on what buyers looking at the Grenadier really want: utility and usability, and the new car's fully revealed cabin definitely reflects that. There's plenty of space inside, and it looks and feels chunky and solid, if maybe not the most premium offering. But then, with prices starting from around £45,000 including VAT, it's not priced that way. Plus, BMW derived tech should help it here. Our next step will be to sample that and the technology that underpins the Grenadier with a first drive in a prototype machine later this year. And the signs are certainly looking positive for this seriously rugged off-roader.